Welcome to the Squared Circle Pit with your host, Rob Pasbani.
Now entering the Squared Circle Pit, he is the owner of Technique to Training Wrestling, a awesome wrestling school here in Brooklyn, New York. Tom Frazier. Tom, welcome to the pit.
All right, thanks for having me, Rob.
It's a pleasure to have you on. I'm a big fan of what you're doing here in Brooklyn. We always need places for new wrestlers to come and safely train. So I think it's cool that you are giving wrestlers this outlet. And there's some definitely known names. Willow was a trainer. Hot Sauce Tracy Williams. Logan Black is your head trainer. And so you guys have a lot of cool names. And you own this school. Before we talk about the school, I'm curious, how long have you been a wrestling fan? What's your earliest wrestling memory?
Oh man, 2006 I got into it, like around the time of WrestleMania 22. That was like my first WrestleMania. So since then, and then after that, like I kind of got out of it pretty quickly. But
how old were you during WrestleMania 22?
2006, so I was 9.
Okay.
And then I was interning at an internet radio station in like maybe 2018. And one of the daytime talk shows was a wrestling talk show. And it wasn't anything big or anything notable. Nobody's probably ever heard of it, but it had a lot of independent wrestlers coming in and out. So I was starting to meet them, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember wrestling. Like I remember that. So it made me get back into wrestling from like a indie perspective, meeting all these guys and like being like working with them. I was like doing the boards for this show, and so I started going to their shows, the guys that I was meeting at this radio station. So it got me back into wrestling from like an indie standpoint.
And who were some of those wrestlers that got you back into it?
Logan Black was a big one. He ended up becoming a good friend of mine and a mentor once eventually I decided I wanted to get into wrestling from a behind the barricade standpoint, from the other side of the curtain. He was definitely my mentor. He was definitely like an integral part of getting my footing and like learning the ropes and like learning how to operate things and how the business goes, because there's no business that operates the way wrestling does. So like he was that person, that trusted name in the scene that was like vouching for me, a guy who nobody knew who the hell I was, and he was just the guy that was like no, Tom's cool, and he was telling me like, hey, here's how you act, here's how you go about things.
Let's take a step back. You said as a kid you got into it around WrestleMania 22 and then got out of it. What turned you off to wrestling that you stopped watching it?
I feel like maybe not everybody, but a lot of people have that moment where they're just like, you're a kid, you're a literal child, and you think it's the coolest thing ever. And then like, you grow up and then you're like, okay, I'm over this now. And, a lot of people get away from it.
Yeah, I can't say I ever had that, but I understand the sentiment.
Yeah.
And then I think it's cool though that like indie wrestling got you back into it because you realize like, oh, wrestling, I'm assuming you realized wrestling isn't just this big, mainstream spectacle. There's an underground element to it, which I'm assuming is something you related to more. I'm guessing you listened to punk and stuff like that as well growing up.
No, actually, I was a rapper. That's what I was doing at that radio station.
Oh, okay.
From a young age, from like 13, I was a rapper, a failed rapper. But yeah, that was I was heavy into hip hop. That was like my whole life. And then around 2018, that was like the tail end of it, like when I was kind of getting over and being like, hey, maybe I should hang it up as a rapper. And I was like, well, maybe I'll produce shows instead of performing at them. And then, that's when Jake and all these wrestlers were like, oh, well, if you want to like promote shows and like be a producer of like live events, why don't you get into wrestling? And I was like, that's not a bad idea, because by that time I was already going to see them at these indie shows and like I had gotten back into it.
That's really cool.
So I actually wasn't in the punk scene until maybe 3 or 4 years ago when I moved from Queens into Brooklyn and started like living that alternative lifestyle and like being in that scene and in those spaces.
And you grew up in Queens? Is that where you?
Yeah, I grew up in Queens.
And
not
so
too far from the Queensboro Elks Lodge, a couple blocks away.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Have you ever got to shows there? Were there shows there? Is it still open?
Yeah. Yeah, there were shows there a lot in like the 2018, 2019, like a lot of lower level indies were running shows there. That's like I was going to see them, and I was like, oh, this is
Mhm.
happening like right up the block from my house.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So you said you were into rap. What were some of your big rappers growing up? Who were some guys you looked up to?
Nas was like my favorite rapper of all time, especially being from Queens. Black Thought, Mos Def, Eminem was a big one. As I got older, I was like later into high school, I started getting into Mac Miller and Anderson Paak and like all these like more groovy kind of like chiller vibes. As I was escaping my teen angst, I transferred over from Eminem to like Mac Miller and being like vibing out. Also, in high school, I had short hair and a short orange beard, and I looked just like Mac Miller, and that's though. And I was a rapper, so those comparisons were impossible to escape.
So you just identified with him in a way.
Yeah.
And so, like, what are you listening to nowadays?
Nowadays, I'm just like so obsessed with the local punk scene here in Brooklyn. Like, if you look on my Spotify like songs, it's like all just bands that like I know personally from the punk scene here in New York City, and just like so engulfed in it. Like, I'm doing shows, like I'm promoting shows, just punk shows too. Like every show I do for the past couple years has had like a punk band at the end, and even just recently, I've turned the T2T space into a show where we just do DIY punk music as well. And like I've just really kind of dove headfirst into that scene. I've recently in the past year I've started managing bands because the unique set of skills of like connecting people and like knowing a lot of people. So I manage 3 bands now. I'm heavily involved in the punk scene here in Brooklyn, and like that's like pretty much all I listen to at this point. Is just like seeing what's going on in the scene, seeing what my people are doing.
And what would you say are the comparisons between like working in the punk scene and working in the wrestling scene, since you have your foot in both?
Very DIY. I would say the punk scene does a better job of like weeding out the people who just want to play pretend. You can easily tell when someone's taking something serious, and the people will flock to that, as opposed to wrestling where like a lot of it is just people trying to play pretend. We always say here at T2T where it's like you're not going to last if you just want to play. If you just want to play wrestler. We come here, we stress the basics, we stress the footwork. It's tedious, especially in the beginning. And a lot of people that just want to come in here and do a backflip and a moonsault and a 450 splash, and they want to talk about like what their finisher is and like plan all these WrestleMania type stories and matches. You got to learn how to walk before you run. And there's so many people in the wrestling scene that just want to play wrestler, and they don't want to put in the hours and hours and hours it takes to fucking really get your basics down. That's the comparison there, is that in punk, there's less people trying to play pretend. Everybody is like shooting for the stars.
That's interesting. And also I feel like with that, if someone comes in, there's a safety issue with training people, because it's not only that person's safety, but the person they're in the ring with.
Oh yeah, it's a dance. Absolutely, you got to trust the person you're in there with.
Yeah, so to want to go in there and do a 450 your first day, it's like, well, like you said, hold on one second. You got to learn certain things
Absolutely.
in there. So, do you also train? I know you own the school. Do you get
No,
in there?
no, 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 no. That's a lot of people say, like, oh, well, Tom, like, you don't even wrestle. How can you own a wrestling school? And it's like, well, I do things a little
Tom, you
different,
don't even wrestle. How could you own a wrestling school?
right? Crazy. Uh, no, I leave that all to the trainers. I just run the business side of things on the back end. I've never stepped foot in the ring. I've taken a bump before, and then I got up and I said, I don't think I'm gonna, I don't think I'm gonna do that. That shit is the real deal. Not fun.
Well, hey,
One of our earlier trainers, Brother Greatness. He we were just, it was just the two of us, and he was like, he was very much like, Tom, you should get in the ring. You should learn how. You have a once in a lifetime opportunity. You don't have to pay. It's your school. You just come in and learn how to wrestle. And I was like, yeah, when the time's right. And then eventually I was like, no, it's because I'm one of those guys that'll just do it. And so like I was like, no, I'm not. If I keep putting it off, that means it's not in my heart. And to throw
yeah.
yourself around and get your ass kicked to learn how to do something, you gotta really want it. And I was like, yeah, I don't think I want it. I think I like my position in wrestling and my position in the Brooklyn nightlife scene right where it is right now, and I don't think I need to get in the ring.
Yeah, yeah, that's very commendable in a way. I feel it's for the best because you just let the professionals do the work, and you're just working behind the scenes, like you said. Because I feel like one thing that wrestling and punk has in common is there's plenty of people that want to do the fun stuff, but when it comes to doing the paperwork, that's where they might have a blind spot. So there is a real need for people like that.
Absolutely.
And what would you say if somebody wanted to, has the same feelings as you, as a younger person, really into wrestling or into music, and wants to kind of get involved without necessarily getting in the ring or getting on stage? What would you recommend they do?
I recommend they look themselves in the mirror and like just ask yourself, do you really want it? Are you going to waste your time? You could waste your time, but are you going to waste everyone else around you's time? Do you really want it? Are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to starve? Are you willing to fucking be miserable to fucking do what you want to do? Are you willing to go that extra mile? Are you willing to make the financial commitment? Because if you're not, the next person might be.
Yeah, that's true. You got to ask, like, what do you, and also like, what exactly do you want to do, and how what you're currently doing would help get to that end goal. I feel that's another thing. Like people get into it, it's like, do you really like if you just want some free tickets? Like you could just buy tickets. It's only $10. Like don't do this just to get some free tickets. Do it because you care about the scene and you want to actually help out.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody wanted to sign up for the school, what is the process for them?
At T2T, we're a super laid back environment. A lot
Hmm.
of wrestling schools will charge you like a deposit, like a hefty deposit. Some make you sign a contract that you have to stay for a certain amount of time, which I understand the thought process behind that of like, hey, like if you're gonna come in here and like expend the trainer's energy and expend like, take up time in class, learning how to do stuff, we want to know you're taking it serious and we want you to make this commitment, this time commitment. We are a little more lax than that. We have a very simple come on down. You could check out a class. You can't participate, but you could watch a class and like watch the atmosphere. The atmosphere is a big part of T2T. It's an atmosphere unlike any other wrestling school. It's a queer safe space. It's queer forward. Like I'd say at least 90% of our students are queer. It's very simple. You come in, you can check it out, or even if you wanted to sign up the day of you get here, it's you sign up, no commitments, pay as you go. Um, you get the first month prorated. Yeah, it's a very simple, lax process. You can come for a month and say, hey, this ain't for me, and we say, hey, no problem. On you go, no problem. Have a nice life. We won't be upset about it. You come, you do a year and say, hey, actually, this isn't for me. No problem. You come and you do a couple classes. You do have to pay for a month because it's a monthly tuition. But like, even if you
Hmm.
did one class and got up and said, hey, I'm out, I'll say, hey, no problem. It's all good. Because also with it being a queer safe space is there are some people here that don't take it seriously, but they're not pretending. They're not playing pretend. They're not pretending like they're taking it seriously. There are people here who just want to be a part of a queer community in a queer safe space and maybe get in a little bit better shape. And they don't want to be the next Roman Reigns. They don't want to even be the next indie wrestling superstar. They just want to have a good time, exercise a little bit with their queer pals, and fucking, it's like I've queer friend groups that come in and they join together, and it's like a hangout. That's a very different aspect of like as long as you're being honest with yourself and being honest with us and like hey maybe some people aren't taking it super serious but they respect the ring, they respect the atmosphere, they don't fluff off, they don't they're not here goofing off, they're taking it serious because they're respecting everyone else's time, but at the same time they know that they're just here to be a part of a queer community. That's what we realized quickly after starting it because me as a queer man, Jake Logan Black as a queer, our head trainer, a notable queer person at the time, MV Young, who actually opened up T2T Pittsburgh, but at the time when he was living here in Brooklyn was the other trainer. So it was me, Jake, and me, Logan, and MV. When we had started this, we just started a wrestling school because we were all three Brooklyn local
Yeah, I
people
was gonna
and
ask, like, what gave you the idea to do it?
well, just it was we started in 2020 and it was COVID time, so we just had a like a opportunity. There was a gym that I knew the assistant manager, and they were like, "Hey, like we're really hurting for for cash flow because all the gyms were closed." They said if you or any of the wrestlers you work with want to come in and do private sessions, we're going to keep it COVID safe. Maybe one, maybe two people in here at a time. And it wasn't working out. And I pitched to them. I said, "Hey, well, if you need some money, I could open up a wrestling school in here. If obviously it's going to take me some time to build that up, but we got it off the ground because the rest of the world was pretty much at a total stop. So we got it off the ground in I'd say maybe 2 or 3 months. And then the first Monday, I remember there was the first Monday that gyms were allowed to be open again was our first class in 2020, like late 2020. And it was me, it was Logan, it was Brother Greatness, and it was MV Young. And 3 out of those 4 people were notable queer people in the wrestling scene. And unbeknownst to us, it was going to become a big time queer safe space. And it was very much like a matter of we didn't open it. We were just like, okay, cool. We have this opportunity. Let's open up a wrestling school. And we hadn't even realized that there were so many queer people. We assumed there would be some, but we didn't realize how it was going to pop off from the start. There were so many queer people that didn't have that safe space and they didn't feel comfortable in other wrestling locker rooms, and they flocked to us. And our first year was like something so spectacular. It was something so magical.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like that's something that was always a problem, and you hear with wrestling. I feel with people who are queer or women, or just how it was hard to find a place. They'd go to wrestling schools and they wouldn't feel welcome; they would feel threatened. Excuse me.
Absolutely. Then it escalated even beyond that, where people were coming in and then being in this safe space were coming out as queer to us and coming out as
Oh wow.
trans, binary, and like people were discovering themselves being in that space. And it became so much more than just like wrestling. Like wrestling was what was bringing us all together, but it became so much more than that.
That's so interesting. Like, it's interesting that you didn't start it with the intention. It's just you naturally knew queer people who were interested in learning how to train, and because just the demographics ended up being the way they were, it just became organically what it is now.
hmm Absolutely. And
Um,
currently, as I mentioned, MV Young, he
right.
eventually was like, "Hey, I have to move to Pittsburgh." That's where life was calling him. That was his hometown, and so he
Mm.
moved out there, and he received an opportunity to open up a wrestling school. And I said, "Hey, if you want to continue on what we've built here and bring that to your hometown in Pittsburgh," and he was like, "Absolutely." And he started T2T Pittsburgh out there, and now he is doing the same exact thing that we did here. And it's a beautiful thing that's happening, and that's ultimately what I want to do is I want to open up T2Ts all across the country in other cities, because you'd be crazy if you think that Brooklyn was the only neighborhood that had queer people that didn't feel safe enough to join a wrestling school. I'm sure that's times 10 in other cities, in less progressive cities.
Yeah, and I feel also with maybe a little before the pandemic, even, but queer wrestling was being celebrated for the first time. I feel
Oh yeah.
in previous generations there wasn't that much representation, and if it was, it would be some sort of gay panic like Goldust or something like that, who was
Right.
a great character, but just a very tunnel vision version. Whereas now, there's lots of great places like. A Matter of Pride and Effie's a big gay brunch and stuff. So there's more representation for these type of wrestlers where
Well, unfortunately,
more.
I don't even know if you know this, Rob, but A Matter of Pride's run by Rick Cataldo, who unfortunately sexually assaulted a couple people in
Oh, wow.
yeah, they
Oh.
yeah, it's unfortunate, and a lot of people don't know, especially like outside of wrestling. Like I work in the drag in the burlesque scene here in New York, and
Hmm.
where Rick Cataldo is still active, and it's unfortunate because like people don't know. In most spaces, Rick has been exiled here in wrestling. They
Well,
kind of
that
just
that explains why I haven't heard about that promotion for quite a bit. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I personally know a couple of the victims myself,
Oh, that's
and
very
it's
unfortunate.
unfortunate. Like people that I work with in the drag and the burlesque scene, sometimes I'll see like show flyers with them on it, and I try to spread the word as best I can. But it's tough because
Yeah.
they were a very established drag performer before any of that ever happened. So
Hmm.
They were doing their thing before I was even in drag, burlesque, or wrestling communities. So it's hard for me to come in. But there's, I mean, Outsports did an article on it. There's a lot that it's a known entity if you just a quick Google search. But yeah, it's unfortunate that that still exists. But beyond matter of pride, Effie's Big Gay Brunch,
yes,
Pride Style Pro, Hood Slam, Dark Sheik's Hood Slam out on the West Coast too. There's tons. There's, I mean, and that the list goes on. Comparatively to 5 years ago, there's, I mean, I'd say 100 times more.
Yeah, and what's the one that Billy Dixon would do? During
Paris
Pride?
is bumping.
Paris is bumping. That was it.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was such a fun
that's a very
show.
fun. It's like a rendition on a drag ball. It's a very cool concept.
Yeah, and I'm like, again, I feel like much like with music and wrestling, with drag and wrestling, there's such a crossover because I mean,
Absolutely.
wrestling is drag. You're creating a persona that's like an elevated version of yourself.
100%.
So how much, you are into this underground wrestling, obviously. Like, how much wrestling do you consume, and what do you watch? What do you follow?
Almost none at this point. Beyond just my own, it goes whatever wrestling that I have a hand in creating, and that extends to my students. All the T2T students. I'm always like trying. Well, there's a bunch of them, and they're all doing wonderful things, and I try to keep track of what everybody's got going on. So like it's all dependent on whatever any of my students are doing. I'm always going to check that out and support that. But beyond that, it's just it's me. It's like whatever I've got a hand in producing, and then also Casanova Valentine, which I believe is where we met. We met at a Casanova Valentine show once.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So whatever Casanova Valentine and New Fear City, that crew is doing, they're also doing very cool Brooklyn underground shit. That's pretty much my diet is whatever I'm doing and whatever Casanova and New Fear City are doing and whatever my students are doing. Like I don't watch the TV products anymore. I'm pretty much worn out on wrestling, to be honest with you, like other people's wrestling. I don't like it's not I don't really, for lack of a better term, I don't care. And all other, like I said, other queer wrestling like Dark Sheiks, Effies, Billies, whatever they've got going on, I'll always support that. But even that, like I'm there to support that because like those are friends of mine and they are homies and they're doing queer representation properly. So I will support that. But like I'm pretty much spent out on wrestling at this point.
Before you were spent out on it, what wrestling was your like preferred style? Like, what drew you to it?
Oh, I always loved ECW, man. I'd go on the network and I'd watch endless ECW. I'd watch a lot of like SmackDown, like early 2000s SmackDown. I guess you could say is that like the common denominator there was Paul Heyman influence. Pretty much anything Paul Heyman had a hand in creating, I was eating it up.
Same.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself as a Paul Heyman disciple, someone influenced by him and trying to do your own thing anyway?
I guess. I mean, it'd be hard for me to say no. I just said I ate up everything that he was creating in those times in the late '90s, early 2000s. So it'd be hard for me to then turn around in the next sentence and say no. But yeah, I guess so. I mean, yeah, that was all the wrestling I loved and all the wrestling I consumed.
Who were your guys in ECW? Like, who were your favorites when you were into it?
Fucking Taz. I was a big Taz mark. Fucking Sabu, Sandman, Tommy Dreamer, of course. I was a Tommy Dreamer and a Taz mark as a kid. And then just as an adult watching it, like going back and watching stuff on the network, I think I was just more enamored by the whole product and the craze that it was and like how DIY it was. Like when you watch Beyond the Mat and they do this quick little cut scene and it's like I think it was Tommy Dreamer, but it was like someone in Paul Heyman cutting a promo in his like
it was Joey Styles, yeah.
Joey Styles, thank you. Cutting a promo in his fucking laundry room. Like I was enamored by how they turned that DIY operation into like this, phenomenon.
Yeah, I remember when I saw Beyond the Mat and I saw that, I was so blown away that like, no way, they always have the arena sounds. I thought they shoot all this stuff in the arena, the way they their kayfabe, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that was very fascinating. And also seeing, of course, the epic Paul Heyman speech in that movie.
Oh, of course. This is the dance. Incredible. Funny stuff.
Although overall that pay-per-view was not the best pay-per-view. Not the best representation of ECW. They had far better moments, I think. In general, I feel like their pay-per-views weren't ever their strong shows. Like all the other kind of VHSs were where all the fun stuff was. Do you have any like favorite matches you go back to from those eras?
No, not really. I just like to put on something random, and or, like at the time, I would put on something random and just watch and just soak it all in. Like I said, it was less about the individual performer or the individual match. It was just like
Hmm.
soaking up like what ECW was and what it represented, and like fucking like what they were doing.
Yeah, and I feel like with Casanova Valentine and with New Fear City, it's in many ways like a evolution of ECW. I feel like it's
Oh,
even more
absolutely,
DIY. Like the idea that there's no ring. It's just let's get to the brawling. This is a bar brawl.
100%.
When you went to your first one, what was your reaction when you like? Because you're very close to the action. There's no way to kind of miss it. It's a very intimate setting. What was your first experience like at one of these no ring death matches?
Shit, I'd have to really reach back, and I mean, I've been to all of them in the past few years. I'm trying to think about what my first experience was. I don't know. I think I'd already just been like back in the indie scene by
Hmm.
that time. So like,
I see. So you've been going to deathmatch shows before. When you got back into the indie scene, it sounds like you would go to shows with more of a edge, right, with a violent
well,
edge.
yeah, after a while, at first I was going to the most traditional, boring, run of the mill shows at the Queensboro Elks Lodge. And then that didn't last too long. That lasted like maybe 6 months before I was like, there's something better out there. I can feel it. And then I found the
You
scene
got a
eventually.
flyer or something
Yeah.
for a different one.
Mhm.
That's cool. Yeah, and then I'm sure your first Onita tape, you're just like, what the fuck? What have I been doing with my whole life?
Yeah.
That's cool. And so, I want to just quickly circle back to the safe space aspect of it. What do you
Mhm.
think is vital to create a safe space so people feel comfortable training and not threatened like that?
The most vital part has been Logan Black. He day job is pulling the curtain back. He's a New York City special ed public school teacher. So I mean, just corralling a group of people and being their leader, and also being that patient person, and like he knows how to lead. He knows how to teach. I don't, and when I say teach, I don't mean he knows how to instruct wrestling. Like he's very good at that, but his real, like the real vital aspect to it is he knows how to teach. He knows how to give information from his brain to someone else. It's not just here's how you take a bump. Here's how you do this. It's like they're getting a public school city educator's rendition on teaching pro wrestling. It's as if you were going to like a real school and learning how to be a wrestler in a classroom. Like he's got that down pat. And the fact, sorry, I'm veering about now. I'm just raving about Logan Black as a
That's
trainer
fine.
and as a leader. But the point of it is that MV and Jake and myself, we had this zero tolerance, no bullshit policy. We didn't let stuff slide. We didn't, and we also never really had to like flex that. There was never any people that came by and they they were problematic people, and we didn't even get to that level. People didn't even try it, and they still don't. And because I mean, like they know not to fuck with it. We have this zero tolerance policy, and I knock on wood, I guess, but fucking nobody's tried us yet. Nobody's fucking came in here on some bullshit. People come in, they respect the space, and I believe that's because we set the tone.
Yeah, that's great. And like you said, if the tone is set, people can immediately tell what the vibe is of a room, and you don't want to change the vibe.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. So if people want to train, what do they have to do? Obviously, they have to be relatively close to Brooklyn or Pittsburgh, but how could they find out more about your schools?
You reach out to us via social media. We're at T2T Wrestling Academy on Instagram, or at T2T Pittsburgh if you're in the Pittsburgh area. And we're super active on social media. Just reach out, and we'll send you over the info, and then come on down and take a look and join the fun.
Awesome. And what are some bands that you're managing or listening to that you think people should
So
check out?
I started by managing Curl, QIRL. They're innovating bug punk here in New York City, which is like art punk and egg punk combined. They are about 2 years in now. We're putting together a tour for this spring. Album coming out this spring as well. Got a lot of cool stuff. You can check them out on Instagram at curl. That's QIRL. That was the first band I started managing just on some homie shit, just on like I knew I wanted to get into band management in a professional sense in the next year or two. And I was like, hey, we're already hanging out. We're already helping each other out. I'm already, doing things for you guys. Would you mind me being your manager just so I could have a frame of work? And they were like, we were actually already going to ask you to do that anyway. So that worked out well. And we've been cooking up some real cool shit. So be on the lookout for Fiction Factory, the new album by Curl coming out this spring. They were the first band I managed. Then I started managing a band called Uppies, who have recently just played here at the QPO space. They did a big one night only show, but in true wrestling fashion, I had to grab from my wrestling roots for this. We did one night only, but it'll be back. They're the drummer for Uppies lives out in California, so they've got an album coming out soon that's already been recorded. But as far as live shows, we can get them when we can get them. You know what I'm saying? But be on the look for the Uppies album coming out soon. And then I just recently started working with this band Blossom, Blahsum. And somebody had reached out to me and they said, hey, you got to go check out this band Blossom. They're a rough and rowdy rap duo. And I said, okay, I'll go check them out. And they were doing a show at Scorpion Records, and which is in Ridgewood, which is where I live. And so I went to go check it out. And it was a 6-piece live band doing a psychedelic outlaw country set, mixing in their originals. And I'm texting my friend. I'm like, hey, this isn't a rough and rowdy rap duo at all. But also, that's totally fine because what I'm watching right now is way better. And we chopped it up after their show, and then couple months down the line, ended up started working with them in an official aspect as well. So Blossom at BLASUM. Curl. Uppies doesn't have Instagram. They're too cool for that. They're too punk rock for that, I guess. Yeah. So those are the three bands that are starting the Queer Punk Outlaws artist management company. So be on the lookout for all of them. We're going to be doing a lot of cool shit this year.
Awesome. Well, Tom, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and letting me know more about your school. I think it's very cool what you're doing, and I
Hell
think
yeah.
more people should do this
Sure.
kind of cool
I think
stuff.
very cool what you're doing, Rob.
No, very nice. Well, thank you for entering the pit.
No problem. Thanks for having me.